The earth spoke before the woman appeared, and Azindo's shadow translated every word. He was in the cave beneath the old quarter, 3 days into the bridge building that Pognazara's protocol knowledge had unlocked, when the root lines beneath Ironhaven shuddered with a presence his shadow had never felt in another human being. Not the Zagale signal he had learned to tell that apart, a deep bass pulse from beneath the system's foundations, the heartbeat of beings who measured their age in stone layers. This was different. Horizontal. Fast, moving through the root line network from the north, with the force of a flash flood, not gently, not gradually, but with the overwhelming urgency of something that needed to arrive more than it needed to be careful. Two presences, his shadow read them the way a hand reads texture by touch, by feel, by the grain of what it encountered. The first presence was young and impossibly deep, a communion reach that extended from the surface to the sealed layer where the Zagale guardians slept. This was not ordinary Tindana communion. This was the kind of depth the system had been built to hold but had never, in the faction era, actually received. A listener. The listener. The one the Zagale had been calling. The second presence was older, more disciplined, riding in the firsts wake the way an experienced boatman rides a stronger current, not steering, but trusting. A master. A teacher who had broken rules to bring his student to this place.
Someone is coming through the root lines,
Azindo said. His eyes were closed. His shadow was stretched in two directions, one tendril holding the bridge to the Enskinment chamber, the other reaching into the root line layer to track the approaching presences. The dual extension should have been impossible. Shadow binding had never been built for split awareness. But the bridge building had changed something in the binding by learning to reach downward through cracks in stone. His shadow had grown a flexibility that the Ashvale Order's flat-ground training had never demanded.
Moving fast, 2 people. The first one carries the Zagale signal, not the echo, the thing itself. She has been to the source.
Pognazara pressed her palms to the cave floor. Her earth bond confirmed what Azindo's shadow was reporting. The root lines were carrying travelers. The old technique, the one the Tindana Circle had forbidden after Nyariga's exile, the one that used the root line network as a road, was being ridden with a power and a recklessness that the Circle's cautious methods had never imagined.
Above us,
Pognazara said.
They are surfacing, here in the old quarter.
The courtyard was bright with late morning sun when Azindo climbed from the underground passage. The light hit him like a slap. 3 days in the cave had thinned him further, his cheeks had gone hollow, the silver at his temples had spread past his ears, and the daylight found every new line the bridge building had carved into his face. He squinted against the glare. Dust motes turned in the air like slow gold, and the warmth of the sun on his forearms was so sudden and so good that he stood still for a breath and let it soak into his skin. The old quarter's abandoned buildings stood around the courtyard like the bones of a dead animal, collapsed roofs and dust-choked doorways forming an accidental amphitheater. Beyond the broken walls, the sounds of Ironhaven's Damba preparations drifted in the distant thud of drums in rehearsal. A woman's voice singing a genealogy chant that Azindo's mother had sung when he was small. The hammering of carpenters building the festival stages. The smell of cook fires carried on the Harmattan breeze, wood smoke and groundnut soup, and the sharp green scent of fresh-cut millet stalks for the bunting. Life continuing. The city preparing for its biggest celebration, oblivious to the rot in its foundations. 2 travelers had materialized from the earth at the courtyard's center. The young woman was kneeling, her palms flat against the packed clay, her body still humming with the residual energy of the root road. She was 20, close to Azindo's age, though the comparison felt thin given that her reach went deeper than his in directions he could not follow. Blood had dried to a dark crust on her upper lip. A nosebleed. The physical toll of communion pushed past its safe limits. Her clothes were the simple cotton of a Tindana apprentice, dusty and travel-worn, unremarkable in every way, except that the woman wearing them had just traveled 600 kilometers through the Earth's nervous system in 6 hours. She lifted her head, blinked at the sunlight, wiped her nose with the back of her wrist, looked at the blood, and laughed a short, startled sound, half exhaustion and half disbelief. Samini told me my nose would stop bleeding after the first 100 kilometers. She said. Her voice carried the clipped vowels and rolled consonants of a Frafra accent Balgatanga, maybe, or one of the villages east of there. That was a lie. The old man behind her, the master, the teacher, planted his staff in the courtyard earth and said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved in the way of a man who has been caught in a lie and does not regret it. Azindo's shadow reached toward her across the sunlit ground before he could stop it. Not the controlled extension of Ashvale technique. Something deeper. An involuntary pull, the way your hand reaches for a wall when you stumble. His shadow stretched against the angle of the light, defying the physics of casting, straining toward the woman's communion with a directional certainty that could not be hidden. She felt it before she saw it. Her head snapped toward the ground between them. Her palms pressed harder against the clay, the Tindana's instinctive gesture, the reflex of someone who felt something approaching through the medium she was most attuned to. The contact happened through the soil. Shadow met communion 3 feet below the courtyard surface. Azindo's reached the binding's feeling hand, its way of touching what was broken collided with the listener's depth, and the collision was not a collision. It was a held breath releasing. Warmth returning to numb fingers after a night in the cold. That was the closest Azindo could get to the sensation. 2 pieces that had been separated so long they had forgotten their own shape, touching, and the shape coming back. His shadow interlocked with her communion the way fingers interlock when 2 hands clasp each piece fitting into the other's gaps, each fragment completing a form that neither could hold alone. Through the connection, he could suddenly feel the root lines. Not the faint, distant awareness he had groped for during bridge building, the full, rich, textured experience of the network as a Tindana felt it. The ancestral voices, layered and murmuring. The geological memory, deep and slow. The language of earth and stone that carried the Zagale's words across the territory. His shadow had always been able to brush against the root lines. Now, connected to the listener's communion, he could hear them speak. And she, he felt it through the connection, could now feel the shadow bindings reach. The shape of the corruption. The real skin's buried pulse beneath the copy. Everything his shadow had been trying to tell him in its geometric language was now available to her. 2 ways of feeling the same wound, cross-referencing, building a picture more complete than either could draw alone. The Zagale guardians, deep below, felt the connection settle into place. Through the listener's communion now extended and amplified by its contact with the shadow's reach, Azindo felt their response. A pulse of amber warmth that traveled through every still-living grove in the territories. Not a message, an acknowledgement. 2 of 4. WuDon stood. The contact through the soil held once established, the connection between shadow and communion was self-sustaining, the pieces interlocked, the recognition permanent. She wiped her nose again, more blood. I am going to need a cloth for this, she said. Then she looked at Azindo, really looked, not through the communion or the root lines, but with her own brown eyes, the ordinary human act of seeing another person, and what she saw made her expression shift. Not the awe of meeting a prophesied figure, something more practical, more honest. You look terrible, she said.
3 days in a cave.
He said.
Building a bridge out of my own shadow.
That would do it. She rubbed her jaw. The communion had left her body buzzing, and she was grounding herself the way Tindana did small physical gestures, contact with the mundane. The guardian said you were the rejected one. I expected someone angrier.
Give it time.
The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. The acknowledgement of someone who understood that humor was a form of survival. Samini, the old man, the master, had been watching the shadow communion connection with the expression of a man watching a controlled fire that might at any moment become uncontrolled. His petrified staff was planted in the earth like a stake marking a boundary. The staff itself was remarkable fossilized wood, gray as old bone, harder than iron, carrying the residual communion charge of a Tindana who had held it for decades. Samini held it with the easy grip of a man who could, if necessary, use it as a weapon, and the way his eyes tracked Pognazara as she emerged from the underground passage said that he was considering the necessity.
Pognazara.
He gave the salute of a Tindana acknowledging political authority, formal, correct, and cold enough to frost glass. His staff did not lower.
I did not expect to find the earth-bonded hiding in the old quarter.
And I did not expect to find a Tindana master traveling the route roads. The circle forbade it.
The circle forbade many things that turned out to be necessary.
His voice carried the dust of the road and the patience of a man who had spent decades teaching a gift he could not fully share.
I broke my oath to bring her here. Every mile of route road, a violation. The circle will strip my communion rights when they learn.
He did not sound afraid. He sounded like a man who had weighed the cost and paid it and was now presenting the receipt.
But you buried the truth for 43 years and let candidates die on a corrupted skin. So perhaps we can agree that oaths have limits.
The words landed in the courtyard like stones dropped into still water. Pognazara did not flinch. She had exhausted her flinching in the chamber when Tohage had cut her with the same blade. But her jaw tightened and the tendons in her neck stood out, and Azindo's shadow could feel the tremor beneath her control. This was not a political meeting. This was an old woman being told, by a man who had sacrificed his standing to do the right thing, that she had not done the right thing for 4 decades.
You are correct.
Zara said, no deflection, no justification.
And we are running out of time to argue about it.
We are not arguing.
Samini said.
I am making sure you understand that I am here for her.
He nodded toward Wunam.
And for what the Zagele are asking, not for you.
Silence. The Damba drums pulsed in the distance. A lizard darted across the courtyard wall, its belly scraping the sun-warmed clay. You are the rejected one, Wunam said to Azindo. She was looking at his shadow, which was behaving in ways shadows did not behave, reaching toward her across the sunlit courtyard, defying the angle of the light, the binding straining toward the compatible presence with an urgency that could not be hidden.
Azindo.
He said,
And you are the listener.
Wunam. She extended her hand palm down toward the earth between them. A communion gesture. An invitation to formalize what had already happened instinctively, the choice to work together. A Tindana's offer of trust, made in the language of the earth, witnessed by the root lines and the groves and the guardians below. Azindo extended his shadow. The formalization blazed. The interlocked pieces flared shadow and communion merging at a depth neither had reached alone, creating a combined awareness that extended from the cave to the Enskinment chamber to every grove in the network. For one moment, Azindo could feel the entire system the way the Zagele must have felt it when they were whole, not broken, not separated, but unified. 2 pieces of a whole, touching, and the whole remembering what it was. "Two down," Wunam said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright, the look of someone feeling a connection they had trained their whole life for, without knowing it. "The last pattern is here. I can feel the weave at the western wall. Someone arrived this morning." A voice from the courtyard's western entrance, dry as old thread.
Someone did.
Tibigia leaned against the crumbling doorframe with his arms crossed, his plain-weave soldiers fugu dusty from the road. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows of the passage, Zuera stood with her hands folded in her sleeves, but the sleeves glinted. Fugu thread, woven tight, catching the light with the telltale shimmer of active enchantment. She carried her patterns hidden, a weaver's caution.
I am Tibigia.
The soldier said. He had the weathered face of a man who had seen enough to distrust most things, and the wry mouth of a man who found the distrust faintly amusing. His eyes moved across the courtyard, Azindo, Wunam, Samini, Zara with the systematic efficiency of someone cataloging threats and deciding which to address first.
This is Zuera. She does not talk much. She does not need to.
He looked at Pognazara.
We heard the call, the word, we are here. If someone would like to explain why we are standing in a ruin with a woman who has been lying to the entire faction system for 4 decades, I am listening.
And the candidate?
Pognazara asked. The question carried the weight of a woman who had sealed the protocol and was now watching its consequences assemble in her courtyard.
Coming from the east,
WuDon said,
"On foot, he will be here by tomorrow."
2 days until the Damba alignment. 2 of the 4 pieces connected, their awareness merged. The 3rd and 4th already present or approaching. 6 people in a ruined courtyard, bound by a signal from beings who had waited 1,000 years for this, and not one of them fully trusting the woman who had let the crisis grow to this. And beneath the courtyard, 3 levels down, in the Enskinment chamber where the corrupted copy pumped its poisoned power through the system's roots, a man with half an obsidian face felt the reunion through his 3rd skin and understood that the Zagale's ancient failsafe was no longer a distant threat. It was here, in his city, assembling above his chamber. Ch.5 adjusted his preparations. The cage maker was patient. He had been patient for 20 years. He could be patient for 2 more days. But his obsidian half rippled the first involuntary movement it had made since the transformation. Not fear, recognition. The system's scattered pieces were clicking together, and the sound they made was the sound of a lock opening. 2 days,